Let's see. See what we got up on here today. Let's see who we got up on here today. Got a fantastic topic for you today. Ain't gonna be too much, but it's gonna be a very important topic. Greetings. I see a couple of people starting to come on the live. Greetings. Please share this live with your Facebook community and your Facebook friends. As you come into this live, please share this live with your Facebook community. This is going to be a dope topic today, man. This is going to be a continuation. You feel me? This is a part 2 live that I wanted to do today on a sacred day, a special day, far as a part of our story and our struggle here in North America as new African people, black people, African people, period, minus the American. We're talking about our history, our story as indigenous people, black people, new African people, African people. And this is a sacred day, so I had to hop on here real quick so I can do this continuation of another live that I did a couple of months ago in 2019. So as you come into this live, please share it with people that you think might want to learn a little bit about revolutionary nationalism and the suppressed history of black people in this country who has always struggled, died, sacrificed themselves for independence and nationhood. This is a topic that's not popular. So that's why I wanted to do this topic, so I can educate some of my brothers and sisters, African brothers and sisters across the world, because it's a unified front for African freedom, liberation, whatever you want to call it, across the globe. But I wanted to do this one on this sacred day because I want to get my other brothers and sisters and African brothers and sisters across the world more familiar with our struggle inside the empire of the United States of America. Because, and matter of fact, let me go live on this other medium real quick so we can all get it cracking. I wanted to really make this emphasis on this live about the struggle for independence, the struggle for revolutionary nationalism, the struggle for nationhood of black people inside the empire of the United States of America, because this is a suppressed history. This is a suppressed struggle, because all we have got throughout the years is reformist history, colonial subject slave history. So a lot of our history has been suppressed. A lot of our struggle has been suppressed. So I felt like on this great day of struggle, rebellion, that actually took place on this day 200-something years ago on the Mississippi River, on the Gulf Coast of Louisiana, which it goes by many names. It goes by the Charles Dessalines Rebellion, the German Coast Rebellion, I think I just said it, the Mississippi River Rebellion, the New Orleans Rebellion of January 8th, 1811, one of the most suppressed slave revolutions, slave rebellions that has been suppressed by the oppressors, the reactionary historians of the United States of America who have kept this history away from African people, whether you live in the United States, the Caribbean islands, Brazil, the African diaspora, period, or on the continent of Africa. This is one of the most suppressed slave rebellions in history. So I thought that I would take it upon myself to use this sacred day that our great freedom fighter, Charles Dessalines, and his army of 500, you heard what I said, 500 new Africans, indigenous peoples who rose up on this day with a flag, revolutionary nationalism. I'm going to stay on topic today. I ain't going to get too loud. I ain't going to get too over emotional. I'm just going to break this history down. 500, that's what I stated. 500 to 800 Africans, men and women, rose up on this day in Louisiana, New Orleans, to establish, listen closer to what I'm saying, to establish an independent Black African republic on the Gulf Coast of the Louisiana coast and Mississippi coast. Yes, this took place. This happened on today, 200-something years ago. This is the anniversary of the Charles Dessalines Rebellion. The German Coast Rebellion of 1811. I'm going to get into that, but at the same time, I'm going to, try to expunge on how is that relevant to today's struggle. It's relevant to today's struggle. And hold on for a quick second while I get this on here. Let me get this on here real quick. I'm going to get straight into it. Let me just add this up here. Let me put this up on here so the people on Instagram can understand where I'm coming from. Flip that. Yeah. There we go, baby. Just like that. You feel me? I wish Facebook had the same type of feature as the Instagram where you can put pictures and display pictures about what you want to talk about and teach on. I wish Facebook had that feature, but unfortunately it doesn't have that feature. But Instagram does. And what I put up on the screen on Instagram is Free the Land, New African Independence Movement. So you're going to see how I'm going to construct the chronology of these suppressed histories of many, combative actions that took place from Africans who were enslaved in the African diaspora, who was fighting for one thing and one thing only: separatism, nationality, nationhood, land, and a government country of their own. How about that? These people were fighting for separatism, land, nationality, nationhood, independence, a Black government, and a country of their own. How many Africans in the world doesn't know that Africans in the Western Hemisphere have always fought for independence, nationality, land, nationhood, separatism, and a own country of their own? How about that? How many of you know that? How many of you know that that struggle continues all the way up until now in the 2020 year? That you still have Africans, new Africans in the Western Hemisphere who are still fighting for the same thing that their ancestors were hung by ropes, body parts chopped off, heads chopped off, sacrifices, combative missions that were put down, slave rebellions, slave revolutions, to try to get free, to establish an African independent nation state of their own over here, not in Africa. Not to knock Africa, but in the Western Hemisphere. You had Africans trying to obtain what was taken for them when they were took from the nation states and tribes and the economic formations that they were kidnapped from, the settlements, villages, nations that they were kidnapped from when they got here, when they even got on the boats. They were still fighting for what they had back home on the ancestral continent. And what was they fighting for? Revolutionary nationalism. That's not just a fancy word. It's not a popular word amongst the black struggle in the Western Hemisphere and even in the African ancestral land. It's not a popular word. Revolutionary nationalism. It's not a spooky word. It's not a spooky word because we done had some of the greatest revolutionary nationalist leaders to ever come forth to lead black people, no matter where they at on the globe, for revolutionary nationalism. Some of you may know it as black nationalism. But being a new African revolutionary nationalist, we don't like to use color. Color is a distractor. Color is a distractor. It's a constructed colonial illusion. Because no human being can be black or white or have a black and white or color as a nationality. Do you follow me? So this is why we just use the term revolutionary nationalism, even though El-Hajj, Malik Shabazz, and many of the great elders and ancestors who came upon us in that time period chose to use the word black nationalism. When the new African independence movement came on the scene, we redefined that and switched that to new African revolutionary nationalism because we know color is a distractor from what we're truly fighting for. There can be no such thing as a black nationalism because color is not a nationality. This is not to diss the color black because we know black is the greatest manifestation and representation and symbolism of ancient African people. It's not to diss it, but it has to be put in a proper context when you're struggling for nationhood, when you're struggling for something that's greater than just a color. We're humans first, right? We're humans first. Then we are ethnic groups second. These ethnic groups have names, not colors. See, all of this is fitting inside the revolutionary nationalist theory. Revolutionary nationalism is the fact that these ethnic groups, these economic formations, these tribes, and if you go to Africa, you will see that a lot of Africans don't like to be called tribes. This is facts. A lot of Africans don't like to be called tribes. They don't like to be called colors. And don't worry, I'm not wavering off the subject. I'm gonna get back to Charles Desalon and them in a second on this great day. But I'm just, you know how I do, breaking this chronology down of revolutionary nationalism. We got to popularize revolutionary nationalism this decade and beyond. Our people have to know the other side of the struggle, not just the civil rights struggle. This is why I wanted to do this today. You feel me? So, like I said, a lot of Africans do not like to be called tribes. They don't like to be called colored or black. And a lot of people over here in the Western Hemisphere would get offended by that. But why are you getting offended by something that was never in existence over there? Over there in the ancestral land. Those people over there never identified their peoples, their ethnic groups, their communities, their villages, their nation states as colors. It never existed in Africa or nowhere in the world. People didn't start identifying people as color till slavery. That's why it's a slavery concept. And especially when it gets to North America, in a period of time when Virginia sparks off the most dehumanizing system in history, plantation slavery. When plantation slavery started to develop, they had the oppressors, the colonial settlers, the evil colonial settlers of these European nations and empires had to come up with a social engineering construction to control African people. Part of that was stripping you. They were stripping you of your national identity. They stripped you of your national identity. Period. When Africans got to the Western Hemisphere, they were all stripped of their national identities on what they identified with, which was their ethnic group, nationality, their villages, their communities, their nation, states. It's called denationalization. Look the term up. Denationalization. You have been denationalized as a world people. This is why blacks, aka New Africans, or misnomered African Americans, don't have no respect in the United States of America because you're called a color. You're called a color. So you're not recognized in the world community, the world stage, the United Nations, because you're a color. You call yourself a color. You think a color can be a national identity. It cannot. It never was, never will be. So once you call yourself a color, that pushes you out of anything dealing with law. The law books, international court, international law, anything dealing with law doesn't go by color. Period. At all. And the most craziest thing about it all is that when the Bacon Rebellion takes place, you need to write that down. The Bacon's Rebellion. All my people who are seeking truth about why did this thing black and white come into existence, study the Bacon's Rebellion. The Bacon's Rebellion of Virginia, which was led by Bacon against the government of that time in Virginia, came up with a social engineering construct to control Africans, to deeply denationalize Africans even more if they were successful in overthrowing the Virginia government at that time period. Guess what they came up with? African people. They came up with color. Black, white. They separated the two by color. You will not see anybody identifying or calling another national people of color till the Bacon Rebellion of Virginia. Facts. A social engineering construct to denationalize Africans and New Africans. Because once they had you like that, that's when they started to understand that all these laws that will be incorporated by these European empires will put Europeans in a superiority hierarchy and put the African and the New African on the low inferiority complex level. Meaning putting you at the bottom of society once this white nation is brought into existence, which is the United States of America. So they came up with the social engineering construct of color to put New Africans, and every African kidnapped or indigenous person kidnapped into a box to constrain them, to hold them down, to keep them denationalized so they can steal the land and set up their own nation on this land. Facts. This is the history of what happened to you, African brothers and sisters. This is what happened to you. They took your national identity. They took your national representation in the world community away from you. They took your language, your culture, your nationality, your land. People have to understand, Africans have to understand, who are fighting for true freedom today, have to understand that your national identity is the most important struggle of all. Revolutionary nationalism. That's all revolutionary nationalism is. Fighting to be a people in the global world community, recognized as a people in the world global community again. Africans in North America. Africans in North America. You're not African Americans. Africans in North America. because you were something before they stripped it from you and denationalized you and put you under a pseudo identity, which is African American, because there's no such thing as an Africa America country. That's a pseudo identity. That means you're second class. So now, once you're second class, that gives the government the right to oppress you, murder you, genocide you, starve you, treat you like the lowest of the low in the world. Not just the society of the United States of America, but to treat you as the lowest of the low in the global world community. Facts. Facts. This has been a 400-year period of time of deconstructing the African in the Western Hemisphere. They deconstructed you, and they did it through the most important thing that they had to do it with, is strip you of your national identity, man. They had to. Because what is a people who don't have an identity? What is a people who have no nationhood, nationality, land? You see what I'm saying? What are you in the world, African in North America? What are you to the world? You're not black to the world. That's a description. And even my brothers and sisters in the Caribbean islands, the diaspora, the ancestral continent of Africa has now begun to get caught up in this denationalization process of trying to identify as black. That's not your identity. What is your identity? What is your nationality? Your nationality and identity is tied to land and ethnicity. Your ethnic group. Your ethnic group. Period. Revolutionary nationalism is here to take you back, Africans in America, Africans in the diaspora, and even Africans on the ancestral continent. Revolutionary nationalism is the only solution for any African in the world. And this leads me up into the most important part of this video. Those Africans that were kidnapped. Those Africans that were kidnapped. Those indigenous nations that were on this land that had pigment of melanated pigment that was already on this land, who came here from Africa years before the European got us, kidnapped us, and brought us to another foreign land. You got to understand, there were constitutions, there were nation states, economic formations, sovereign formations already on this landmass that came from Africa, already on this landmass before Columbo Dumbo came here and the European Dumbo empires came here. When they got here, they destroyed the economic formations, nation states that were already on this land. They attacked them, denationalized them, stripped them of their identity as well. So now we're rolling into a 500-year period because they did that to the nation states that were already over here, robbed them, killed them, stole their land, and started to set up their own nation states on this land. But guess what, Africans in the Western Hemisphere? Guess what your great ancestors did? The whole time all this warfare was being taken place on Africans in the Western Hemisphere. Guess what they were doing? They were fighting back. They were fighting back. How about that? Isn't that new? Isn't that spectacular? They were fighting back over here. They were fighting back over here. I know many of my brothers and sisters on the African continent never heard of that. Yes, they were fighting back over here. Guess what they were fighting back for? The same thing that they were before they were brought here. Economic formations, nations, states, national identified people on a global community. Nation states. nation states. So those Africans that were kidnapped, brought on those ships, started slave revolutions. Write that down. Africans who might not be aware of this history. Slave revolutions, aka slave revolts, aka slave uprisings, whatever you want to call it, insurrections were initiated. Combat was initiated from the get-go on their imperialist captors. We were captives, they were the captors. That's warfare in political terminology. That's warfare. The European nations attacked Africa, attacked Africa's trade market, the people, and the land. This is all political. This is why you have to get politicized. It's all political. Don't get caught up in that shit. When black people try to tell you, I ain't into politics. I don't want to hear that political stuff today. When you meet black people like that, get away from black people like that. But if you think you can help that black person understand how important politics is to an ethnic group and an ethnic people and a world community people, then you try to teach them about that. But if they ain't trying to hear that, get away from them. Politics is the most important thing when it comes to a national people that's trying to seek liberation, freedom, independence, revolutionary nationalism. So throughout the history and time, I'm bringing it up till today, of the great slave revolution of today, throughout periods of time, there were countless, let me get excited. There were countless retaliatory, combative missions being initiated throughout history on the slave boats, on the North American continent, on the South American continent, throughout the Caribbean islands. Massive, combative, retaliatory, initiated warfare taking place against their captors. The captives started to uprise. Because the captives, you might have took their language, you might have took some of their mind, some of it, because you didn't take all of it. You might have took some of their culture from our great ancestors who were captives. You might have took some of the things that were so valuable to them away from them. But guess what you didn't take away from them? You didn't take away the fact that these captives, these great ancestors knew they were a national people. They knew they was a national identity. They knew they came from nation states. Some of them were already combative warriors, female and male. So when they captured these people, they already knew that they had to fight back, uprise, to get back to what they were, to fight off the captor as long as they possibly could before they were enslaved. And even when they did get enslaved, they still understood that, no, this is not the life that I come from. This is not my country. This is not my nation state. This is not my economic formation, culture, and political people that I come from. We were free before we were enslaved. Every African took on that boat knew this. And the Africans who were already on this land knew this. You can strip them of their language. You can strip them of their culture to a certain degree. You can take them out of their mind. You can colonize their mind with a colonial settler, colonial subject mind. But the one thing that never leaves an African is the fact that he knows freedom. He knows nationhood. He knows land. He knows independence. Facts. He knows independence. He knows freedom. He knows what he's fighting for. He knows what flag is what flag. He knew that the European settler nations wasn't their nation. They never wanted to be a part of no European, U.S., no matter what European nation, settler nation. They never wanted to be citizens of that. We had plenty of ancestors who stood up against that. This history has been so suppressed that when so many black people come across this history, they think it's fake. They don't believe that it's real, but it's real. Your ancestors wanted a nation state inside North America, inside South America, and the Caribbean islands. This is why most of the Caribbean islands, their nation states, are black. They are the highest example of people to even to study and to, observe when it comes to fighting for national identity and national struggle, even though they went through the same thing that the Africans in North America went to. But those Africans in the Caribbean islands and South America fought for their national identity. Even though it might not be their original indigenous identity, but these countries fought for identity. Belize, Haiti, Panama, Virgin Islands, and all the little, colonial, where they ex-colonial, but some of them still under colonized bondage. But a lot of them fought to get the identity that they had today, along with the indigenes that were already on the land. This is why most of those people in the Caribbean islands and South America still have some type of identity that was theirs before the colonizer, before the settler came. So my thing is to the Africans in North America, the new Africans in North America, you have to get with the picture. You have to get with the struggle. What is it that you're really struggling for? Because your ancestors were fighting for one thing and one thing only. The majority of them. Now you had some of the Africans who were so colonized that they didn't want to go back to their, identity. And some of those Africans still exist today. The black African Americans of the civil rights movement. All these black Americans who want a seat at the white man's table in North America. They don't want no African identity. They are lost and done. They have gave up the struggle of their ancestors to be something that they're not, which is an African American, a white identity. It's not an African identity. Many of them have sold out the struggle of the African ancestors who fought back, and especially the African ancestors who fought back on this day, the Charles Dessalines Rebellion. Charles Dessalines organized along with, let's get it right, because it's going to lead me into all my other, what I'm really trying to bring home with the PowerPoint. Charles Dessalines, with other revolutionary leadership of the rebellion that took place on this day, Jupiter, Cook, Kwamana, the other three brave warrior freedom fighters that rose up with Charles Dessalines to organize over 500 something Africans. And they marched from the parishes, the slave plantations of the territory of Orleans. On this day, they marched 500 strong. They even had the sense to know that we need a flag. We need a flag. So they created a flag that was in the image of a West African nation flag and flung their colors. Liberty or death is what these Africans were screaming with guns, pikes, hoes, machetes, walking through Louisiana, heading towards New Orleans to take back what was theirs, nationhood, national identity. We want our land back. We want a country. We want a nation state on this coast over here in North America today. They fought to death. They fought to death today on this great day. They fought to death to return to nationhood, statehood. Long live Charles Dessalines and the German coast, Louisiana slave rebellion of January 8th, 1811. And guess who were the majority of the freedom fighters in this rebellion? The African woman, the new African woman, armed to a T with shotguns, marching through Louisiana, walking through Louisiana, knowing that they were about to get back the greatest thing that was ever taken from them, their national identity. Revolutionary nationalism was springing up all across North America, the Caribbean islands, the African diaspora, South America, especially in Brazil. Brazil, where the most Africans are located in the Western Hemisphere. The Haitian Revolution, the example who actually overthrew 3 European empires. Haiti, Haiti, the Haiti's overthrew 3 world European empires because they never wanted to be slaves. Their ultimate goal was nationhood, statehood. And all the African slave revolutions and slave rebellions that would come after that period in time was all set on example of what the Haitis did, what the Haitians did, and even the slave rebellions before Haiti, because there were slave rebellions that were being initiated before Haiti. The Africans always fought back soon as they got thrown on the ship or before they even got on the ship. And they even defended these indigenous lands when the European brought those Africans from them nation states over here. They went to war. It's too bad too many black people in North America don't know they're in a war. You're in a continuous war that sparked off on the ancestral continent of Africa, and you're still in a war. And they suppressed the history from you. They kept the history from you. They kept it out the history books. They tried to tell you that your ancestors never fought back. That's a damn lie. They fought back every day, sun up, sundown. Sun up, sundown. They planned, plot, strategized. These people were military-minded. The women were military-minded. Killing the slave owners every day, poisoning their food with West African herbs. With West African herbs and traditions, rituals of combative, get down, combative warfare to get back their national identity. This is what the struggle is for. The struggle is threefold. The struggle is for land. The struggle is for nationhood. The struggle is for independence. It's threefold. There is no other struggle. There's no other struggle for blacks in America, Africans in America, new Africans in America. There is no other struggle. There's no equality with your historical enemy. There's no equality with your historical enemy. There's no equality. There's no such thing as equality with your historical enemy who took you from your national identity, who took you from nations and states that you were already thriving in. Nation statehood is the only struggle. There is no civil rights struggle. There's a human rights struggle. There's a human rights struggle. Your people's human rights were violated the day they were captured. Your human rights are still being violated every day. Every day. So 2020 and beyond, understand, African people, that revolutionary nationalism is not just a funny, it's not a spooky term. It's not a spooky word. No, this is what you were, man, let me tell you something. African people are the first nationalists in history. By nature, you are a revolutionary nationalist. By nature, you are a nationalist. Period. And what is revolutionary nationalism? Revolutionary nationalism is known as radical nationalism, is an ideological theory that calls for a national community united by shared sense of purpose and destiny. How about that? Listen to that. Revolutionary nationalism is an ideological theory that calls for a national community unified and shared by a sense of purpose and destiny. What does it say in the UN Charter? The UN Charter, it states plain as day, every people on this planet has the right to self-determination and destiny and purpose as a people. The UN Charter, go get it. So throughout history and time, with all these slave revolutions and these slave rebellions taking place on the North American continent, the Caribbean islands, South America, in North America, there was a nation that was being created, that was formulated with an identical struggle. With an identical struggle. Africans, whether they was from Igbo land, Yoruba land, Congo land, Sinhalese land, Cameroon, Ivory Coast land, Gold Coast land, when they got here, they became a part of a struggle, a self-defense struggle against the European settler and the European nations that would take them through a social development, a re-social development as human beings. When they merged these ethnic groups and these nationalities together, they went through a scientific, social construction, reconstruction. And out of that reconstruction, a new African nation was born. A new African people were born through genetic breeding, through oppressive conditions, through social conditioning. A people came forth, a new African. The new African came forth out of many Africans as they procreated and were socially reconstructing their identity to get back into their right minds and to get back into the right struggle, which is self-defense, and to fight for a homeland. Whether that homeland was going to be here, but they wanted an independent homeland here, or an independent homeland there. Out of that whole chaotic, combobulated chaos of struggle, a new African was born. A new African nation was born with a common identity, a common language, a common struggle, a common ancestry. This is why we call ourselves New African. We are a new African nation. African still, because we are Africans from different African ethnic nations, economic formations, and struggle. But we were socially engineered into something else. This is why we don't speak our indigenous tongues. We speak the settlers' tongue, English. And we were forced to create new culture. New culture. This is why you see so much new culture coming from the black African in America. This is why we are somewhat different than the original African. Because of all that we went through for 400, 500 years of being denationalized, now we renationalizing ourselves. Now we're new Africans with a new African identity. Forging on from the ancestors who fought back, who shot back, and who continue that struggle. New African political prisoners, Dr. Matulu, Shakur, and political prisoners of war. We continued that struggle for nationhood, independence, scientific socialism. The Republic of New Africa is what I am a citizen of. And what those ancestors who died before me were fighting for. The New African Independence Movement has been here ever since the first African was brought off of that boat as a captive, and he stood up that day he was brought off that boat. Period. Period. And before I get off of here, let me, along with giving out salutations to Charles Dessalines and that combative liberation army of 500 Africans who rose up on this sacred day. This is a new African holiday. The German Coast Slave Rebellion of Louisiana is a new African holiday. Put it on your calendar. Put it on your calendar. Teach your babies about what Charles Dessalines and those 500 Africans, the largest slave revolution, slave rebellion in history of the North American continent, to get back to nationhood, to republic, took place today. Let the world know that this existed. Because they have kept it suppressed for 200 years. They have kept our struggle suppressed for 200 to 400 years. And a lot of Africans that live outside of America think Africans in America ain't doing nothing, that they love to be American slaves. I'm here to tell you, Africans that live in Africa and all across the world, there are black people inside this country who are fighting for the same thing that you're fighting for on the African continent. Nationhood, statehood, independence. All of us here don't want to be governed by the European settler who brought us here. See that flag back there? That represents the new African nation. That represents all the African ethnic groups that were captured. That flag. That flag. The green is for the land that we're fighting for. The blood is the blood of all those martyrs in the slave rebellions, slave revolutions who were fighting to get back to Africa and who was fighting to set up a new Africa on this land. Their blood on that flag. That black is the common identity of all African ethnic groups, formation, tribes who were fighting on this landmass, in this African diaspora. On that flag is the distress signal to the rest of the world that Africans inside the United States of America are still fighting against oppression, racism, discrimination, and we're fighting for human rights. That's what that flag stands for. That comes out of the Marcus Garvey Pan-African flag. But that is the new African nation flag. A distress signal that we're over here still fighting to get all the oppressed peoples across the world and all the governments across the world to recognize us as a world people again. We are a world people. We are not African Americans. We are African world people. That's why the colors are flipped upside down. And we will flip the colors back over to the original colors once we have obtained that goal: land, independence, scientific socialism. The flag will go back to its original colors once that is established, once victory is established for the new African nation. And then, before I run this down, and before I get off of here, to answer anybody that because I always get this question, Brother Haki, you live inside the United States of America, Brother Haki. How in the world can you set up an African nation and you're surrounded by your enemies? Well, let me tell you this, brother and sister who have doubts that a nation can be formed on this landmass. There are nations already on this landmass. The native indigenous nations. The native indigenous nations who are still fighting for their independence and the restoration of their nations. You have black nations that were on this land still fighting for that land and the restoration of their nation. They never stop just because they're surrounded by their oppressor. They never stop. The Washita Nation is a prime example. The Washita Nation has been in existence for decades and centuries before the white man got here. They didn't quit. They still fighting for the Washita Nation, who are, in fact, we have Washita citizens a part of the Republic of New Africa as citizens. We're all struggling for the same thing, to renationalize ourselves. And this is why all Africans got to come together no matter what you identify with. It doesn't matter what you identify with right now on the North American continent. We're all fighting for the same thing, independence. So let's fight together to get our nation's independence. Whether you're a New African, whether you're a Moor, a Washita, an Indigenuine, a Nation of Islam, member, citizen, it doesn't matter. We have a common struggle, a common fight right here. Once we get through that common fight, then we'll separate the land and you will set up your nation on that land. Because it's owed to us. There are Africans buried here who died for revolutionary nationalism. We must continue. We must continue to struggle. Period. We must continue to struggle. And also to add on to that point about how can you set up a nation on this land when you're surrounded by your enemies? Africa is surrounded by their enemies. The African countries on the African continent are not completely independent. They got United States bases. They got European bases all in Africa. They surrounded by their enemies every day. Haiti didn't care. Haiti was attacked by 3 empires, 3 European empires. But look at Haiti today. Aren't they a nation? They may be suffering, but they're a nation. They have their national identity. They won. They already won. Haiti already won. You fight first. You get to the questions later. You fight first. You get to the questions later. The Haitians and the Haitis and all these great slave revolutionaries and slave rebellions, they didn't ask questions. They took names last. They took action first and asked questions last. If you're a freedom-fighting lover and a freedom-fighting person, you don't ask questions. You fight first, ask questions last. When you get there, that's when you answer questions. And there were great leaders throughout history who always kept this struggle in the forefront, but it has been suppressed. People like Henry Adams, who was a former slave and nationalist in the 1800s, the late 1800s, 1880. Henry Adams testified to the Congress in 1880 for territory in a black independent nation state. How many of y'all know that? How many of y'all ever heard of Henry Adams, a former slave, who testified to the Congress of the United States of America in 1880. That's ahead of your time. How many of you knew Africans was on that level? How many of you know former slaves was on that level? Henry Adams went in front of the U.S. Senate in 1880 as a former slave. It states, Henry Adams presented his program for black liberation. We first organized and adopted a plan to appeal to the President of the United States and the Congress to help us out of our distress or protect us in our rights and privileges. If that failed, pay attention. If that failed, which all you Africans need to get in tune with now, all that has failed because we have done that for the last 50 years, try to plead to the President of the United States of America and the Senate to help us be, want us to be a part of their government, and it hasn't worked. To get equality and rights has not worked. How many decades are going to go by and we're still begging our oppressors? So Henry Adams in 1880 said, F that. If that failed, our idea was to ask them to set apart a territory in the United States for us, somewhere where we can go and live with our families. This was in 1880. This was before Elijah Muhammad. This was before Marcus Garvey. This was before Noble Drew Ali. Henry Adams, one of the greatest black nationalists, revolutionary nationalists, went to the Congress, told the Congress, look here, if you're not going to make us citizens of America, and if you're not going to give us human rights as Americans, if you're not going to give us civil rights as Americans, we want our own territory, our own land to ourselves. Revolutionary nationalism. Henry Adams. These are the people that I study. These are the people that I know who truly sacrificed for us and was fighting for us in our well-being. This is historical materialism. These are the historical materialists that I look up to throughout history and time. People like Paul Kufi, Martin Delaney, David Walker, Gabriel Prosser even fought for an independent republic. Nat Turner fought for an independent republic. Benjamin Pap Singleton, Edward McCabe, Henry Highland Garnett, Charles Desalon, the Gullah Maroons, Denmark Vesey, Quelo and the North Carolina Maroons, Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad, the Obadeli brothers, Queen Mother Moore, Harry Haywood, Mabel Williams, Dara Abu Bukhari, Sophia Bukhari, Joan Franklin, Asada Shakur, Betty Shabazz, Candy Conte Bay, women nationalists. Tunis G. Campbell, W. Gurley. These are the historic materials. I'm not a Marxist. I'm not a Marxist because there's no such thing as Marxism. I'm not a Maoist because there's no such thing as Maoism. I am an African revolutionary nationalist who believes in historical materialism, the truth and facts of what I can see, feel, hear, and struggle for. Period. And we have to popularize this struggle. Teach your babies that you had ancestors who fought for more than just civil rights, who fought for more than just equal rights with the white man. And here's a chronology of a few slave rebellions, slave revolutions throughout the period of time who fought for us to be independent. Gaspar Younger, the slave rebellion of 1570 of Veracruz, Mexico. The Igbo Bussa Rebellion of April 1816. Barbados, let me say that again. There were Igbos fighting on this land for independence and nationhood. Igbo Bussa Rebellion, Barbados. The Demerara Rebellion of August 18th, 1823, Jack Gladstone. Kwamana, John Smith in Guyana. The Baptist War, the Xmas Rebellion of December 25th, 1831, Sam Sharp. The San Miguel de Guadalupe Rebellion of 1526 in South Carolina and Florida. The Bayano Wars of Panama, 1548 to 1582, Africans fighting for nationhood. The Maroon Wars of Jamaica, 1730, fighting for nationhood. The St. John Slave Rebellion, 1733, Virgin Islands, led by King June Kata, Balumbo, Akwashi, Brefu, a female nationalist freedom fighter of the Ashanti people in Jamaica. In the Virgin Islands. The Taki Rebellion of July 1760 by Taki and the Akan people in Jamaica fighting for landhood and nationhood. The Ababaco Slave Revolt, 1787 to 1788, the Bahama Islands. The Haitian Revolution, 1791 to 1804, to bring into existence the first black republic nation state in the world. The Faydan Rebellion of Julian Faydan of 1795 to 1796, Grenada. The Maroon Wars. The Ecuador freedom fighter of the Ecuador Maroon Wars, Alonso de Alaska. Pour out libation for all these Africans. The Berbice Slave Rebellion of Kufi, Ata, Akara, Akabre of February 23rd, 1763, Guyana. The Tula Rebellion of August 17, 1795, Curacao Island. The Dismal Swamp Maroon Wars of Virginia. The 1820s to 1825 by the great New African Revolutionary Freedom Fighter, Bob Farabee and the Farabee Clan. The Battle of the Suwannee River, the Gula Wars. The Gula Wars, not the Seminole Wars. These were not Seminoles. They misidentified them as black Seminoles. These were Gula Africans, the Gula Wars, not the Seminole Wars. Gula Wars 1, 2, and 3 between 1816 and 1850, fighting for nationhood and statehood, the Gula Geechee Nation. The Igbo, another Igbo slave rebellion on this landmass in this Western Hemisphere, the Igbo Rebellion of the Black River Slave Rebellion of Jamaica, March 22nd, 1816, but led by the King Igbo, the king of the Igbos in Jamaica. The Venezuela Slave Rebellion of Jose Leonardo Chirino, 1795. The Aponte Rebellion of Cuba, 1812, by Jose Antonio Aponte. The Leeward Maroons Rebellions and Wars, led by Cujo in the 1700s. One of my favorites of all time, the Zumbi dos Palmares Wars of Brazil, the Colombo Wars, the Colombo Freedom Fighters, 30,000 strong, setting up independent economic formations on Brazilian land, fighting against their European captors. Long live Zumbi Palmares and his wife, Dandara Palmares, who also led the revolution. There were females that led the revolution. What the Yoruba freedom fighter, Kalata Lukimi of the Cuba Rebellion, a female freedom fighter, 1843 to 1845, fighting for nationhood, independence. Nanny of the Maroons, the Blue Mountain Wars of 1728 to 1734 with the Windward Maroons, the first Maroon Wars of Jamaica, Nanny. The Virginia to Georgia Mountain Maroons on the North American continent that affected the John Brown and the Black Raiders Rebellion, who also was fighting for Maroons out of Virginia and Georgia mountains to set up their own independent settlements and nation states in the mountains of Virginia to Georgia. Mark Caesar, William Wheeler, and the slave rebellions of Maryland, fighting for nationhood. The Kitty, Pala, and the Katara Rebellion of the Virgin Islands, led by 3 African women who were fighting for nationhood and statehood on the Virgin Islands coast. Nanny, Gabriel Prosser's wife, of the Richmond Rebellion of Richmond, Virginia, who was fighting for an independent new African republic in Virginia. Nanny. And last and not least, Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman, who was an African nationalist. Harriet Tubman never wanted to be a citizen of the United States of America, no matter what they wrote in history. Harriet Tubman always wanted African people to have their own. She went to the graveyard fighting for Africans to have their own. She was a revolutionary nationalist, not an American. Facts. So on that note, I thank you for tuning in once again to another great topic and lecture on revolutionary nationalism, to suppress histories of the slave revolutions, the slave rebellions of your ancestors on the North American continent. Please share this live with everybody that needs to be educated about the suppressed history of slave rebellions of the North American continent, South American continent, and the Caribbean islands and the African diaspora. We have always fought back. We have always fought back. We will continue to fight back because that's who we are. That's who we will always be. Let's renationalize ourselves. Let's educate ourselves. Let's agitate for independence, sovereignty, nationhood, and land. That is what the struggle is for. Get in tune. 2020 and beyond. The eyes of Anyawu and all our ancestors is with us. On that note, I'm out. Haki Kweli Shakur. Free the land by any means necessary.